All right, welcome everybody to the 18th community meeting, KUDO community meeting. So I'm hosting today. Hi, I'm Alena. I'm one of the developers on KUDO. So I've prepared an agenda for today. So we start with a kickoff, which is happening right now. Then I'll give you some updates on 030. And then we're going to talk about some caps that are open. And in the end, there's like a discussion that we should probably have, which is about renaming operators, frameworks to operators. Then we're going to wrap up with some community things. I'm not sure whether someone's aware of some talks that are going to happen around KUDO, and then wild open discussion in the end. All right, let's start with the 030. So I was not present at the last community meeting, but I think we talked about 030 as well last time. So we're getting ready for that release. Just to make it like super clear, it's going to be a breaking release. So if you have 020 CLI installed, after we release 030, you won't be able to install frameworks anymore. So we really have to make sure that everyone is aware of that. In terms of like remaining work, I think we're going to release this week. We found like a couple of bugs that we need to address before we release, and then we need to fix the docs and the package registry to update all the packages for 030. I think that's like most of the remaining works. I think we should be good to release this week. Any comments on that, anyone, or questions?
So when we rename the KUDO Builder frameworks or refactor them, you want to keep 0.10 or 0.20 versions and just overwrite them with the new one because it breaks anyways and the old ones cannot use them? Or what is the idea there?
Yeah, that was the idea. So basically we had a discussion and we figured out that since we're still like in this 0 point shady period, that we can still like do breaking changes. So we basically decided to convert all the packages to the new format, which introduces the breaking change I talked about. So yeah, we decided to migrate and not leave the old packages in place. And the reasoning for that is that because with the 030 CLI, you can no longer use the old format to install the frameworks. So we dropped that code.
All right.
Hey, Alexei. Any more comments to that? Questions? All right, let's move to the second point that I have, and that's actually related to the 030, and that's that we I think it's the second cap that we moved to as far as implemented, which is pretty exciting. So another cap done, and yeah, we can focus on new stuff now. And now to some of the caps that are like not implemented yet. So I saw that there's like since the last community meeting, there was the cap 12 and 13 that Tom worked on. Do you wanna share a screen to him and give some updates?
You could just open them up. I'm not going to talk anything outside of the KEP. As a reminder, 12 is framework extensions. And I think we had a provisional merge happen last week, but we still had some outstanding items that we wanted to potentially talk about before we go into implementing. And there were some questions about specifically how do you reference a framework? So if I'm trying to extend a framework, where would the reference happen? Would it happen at the CLI, either locally or in a remote repo? Would it then aggregate to a single framework version that now looks like a coherent unit CRD that gets installed onto the cluster? Or would the installation happen on the cluster with the reference embedded in there, and then the controller would then look inside of its own installed framework versions to figure out the right framework to extend from? And I think this is going to be a important decision in terms of how we implement. So I think we need to kind of solve that first. I'll at some point open up a PR to KEP 12 with a proposed implementation, a proposed answer to that, so that we can do that. I also...
Do you have any preference so far, like in terms of which way to go? Or?
Yeah, I don't know. There's trade-offs in both of those. In some sense, I would rather it happen on the client, the CLI, and then have the logic inside of the controller be exactly the same, because the object, the CRDs that get installed for a framework version would be self-contained and contain everything that's needed. And I think that simplifies everyone's visibility about what is happening on the cluster, because it's all contained in that CRD and there's not ambiguity on, well, if you had changed your installed version of your base framework, then all of a sudden, you know, it's not clear that the functionality of the extension would change, but you could see that the two extensions were different if everything was self-contained. So that's where I would lean on that one.
It also would likely have the benefit of having immediate feedback of a merge failure or formatting failure to the user, as opposed to a runtime situation.
That's a good point. I like that too. Yeah. So I'll submit a PR, or someone can submit a PR to KEP 12 for that. The other question was, so all these framework versions live underneath a big framework. And the idea is that framework versions can be updated between, and they all kind of are the same type of application. Does extending a framework always force it to reside underneath the same framework, or does it always a new framework? And then what is the expectation on upgrades between base and extension? Do we always have to have a new name for the extension framework? And then how would you specify that? So that's more like nomenclature decisions that are needed there, but I think those are kind of important to kind of iron out before we go into details, so that we can make sure there's a good user experience for this feature. Any questions on 12? Cool. 13 is a interesting feature. I'm actually kind of excited about what this could mean for adoption and exposure. So the core concept would be, let's try to be able to run other package specs, and maybe I don't want to talk about package or bundle specs right now, but different applications and how they're defined. So the first easiest second application spec that we should be looking at is probably Helm. We were inspired by the Helm structure when choosing KEP 9, and a lot of the similarities are there in terms of what's defined inside of a chart and what's defined inside of a framework. The difference is that there's some different rendering capabilities inside of Helm than there are in KUDO. But the core functionality of what we'd want from KUDO is available. We want to be able to turn this definition into a set of Kubernetes objects. So given the ability to just convert a Helm chart into a single step, single deploy plan KUDO framework, it gives us a lot of exposure to the other community that has lots and lots of applications already defined. And 12 and 13 were put out at the same time because they marry up nicely together. So after 12 and 13 are both implemented, now we can take a Helm chart and then extend it with plans and other capabilities to make it really KUDO-ish. And I think that's going to be the real power there, so that people can be working on Helm charts and extend their Helm charts to add day 2 operations on top of that. So sure, I have an Elasticsearch Helm chart. It works great for deployments, but now I can add backups and restores and management of my Helm chart in KUDO. And I think that's the value add that KUDO provides there.
So one question there, because I ran into that recently. For instance, the GitLab Helm chart builds upon like the Nginx Helm chart and a bunch of other Aminio and so forth. Is that and Redis? Is that would that be also then in this one supported, that we basically traverse through other Helm charts and like installing them as well? Or because I don't know if I saw that in there.
In the definition of the GitLab, you said?
Mm-hmm.
In the GitLab chart, all of those dependencies are defined inside of the chart. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the question would be more like, how would we deal with dependencies within Helm charts?
From the KUDO level, I would look at that GitLab chart as one chart. And the way it's implemented is a function of the engine that we're going to build for Helm. So that Helm engine would be responsible for understanding and how to resolve what's inside of that chart. So dependencies are something that are well-defined in Helm, and it would be our responsibility to make sure our engine respects that definition.
All right, yeah, makes sense. Cool.
But you're right, there are some complicated features inside of Helm, and maybe that's a down the line, our first pass will just deal with one level Helm charts, and then we'll kind of keep going on and be able to render dependencies like that.
All right.
Yeah. And those were the 6 most popular Helm charts. So I thought those would be a great graduation criteria about, you know, when do we feel confident that this is implemented well?
Jenkins.
I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying it by some metrics, that is the most adjusted, I guess, Helm chart. Any other questions, comments, concerns? I would like everyone to look at the engine interface to make sure that people like it, because that'll be a change in the framework version for non-KUDO. We'll have default be KUDO, but and then there's an interface inside of the controller that will provide that will be able to render Helm charts versus KUDO stuff.
The engine type, it's just like a new field, right? It's just like a new field on the framework version?
And no, up a little bit. Yes, it's that's defined in the framework version. That's either KUDO or Helm, as you can see those consts there. But if you go up a little bit, there's this engine interface there for render. Okay. And the whole idea is that what KUDO really is, it's a way to turn a framework version, an instance, a step, plan, and phase into a set of Kubernetes objects that should be applied at that step. And then at that point, KUDO is then responsible for making sure that the health check passes before continuing on to the next set. But this render engine is really just a very simple way of, you know, given this state of this framework version in this instance, what objects should I be looking for right now? So if we abstract it away like that, that gives us the ability to interpret different rendering engines, and Q might be another one that we want to think about, because I know that there was some interest in that early on.
So for Helm engine, we would. Oh, sorry, Jared. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Alena.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the Helm. So for Helm, we would just basically, when rendering Helm, we would include like Helm as a library on the server side. Is that the idea, or? Okay.
Right. So Helm uses Sprig and then a couple other extra functions, map functions inside of there. So we would be taking that internal rendering plus the logic about how to include the right components. So they have like .tpl files that are also used that provide additional parameters at runtime that have like different options about how that works. So all the logic of the rendering, and then the organization of given these files, templates, what does it look like to actually do that?
Yeah, and that entire package is public, which is really nice. And the only thing we may want to do is when we create the Helm rendering engine, we may want to do a few more deletions from the func map to match what we do, because we're doing the templating server side, right? So it's important that we don't allow access to the environment or expand end or the file, like those 4 functions, right? They already delete 2, but they don't delete the other 4 more that we delete a little more aggressively than they do, and we can do that with their stuff.
Right. I don't see us writing anything Helm-ish. I see us just wrapping what's available from Helm.
Yeah. Did you give any more thought to? Because this is kind of like a lot of like we talked about this whole thing already. Did you give any more thought to being able to set the engine on individual templates and how that might work if you were to like mix local and Helm templates in a like? Is that a semantic we'd want to support, or should we not do that? I guess
my interpretation, and I don't know that I laid it out here because both of them weren't merged. When referencing a based framework in KEP 12, rendering inside of that framework for the base templates would be done with the base templates engine, and at the higher level, it would be done at whatever that framework.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. So that invalidates what we talked about related to this KEP.
Right. So wherever the template's defined that's being used, you use that framework's engine to do the rendering.
Okay.
But just out of curiosity, if you are leaning towards CLI-based rendering for KUDO-based frameworks, right? Why do you
CLI-based compilation, and by that I mean the base framework that's being referenced in the extension should be resolved by the CLI, so that one object goes into KUDO into the CRD.
Oh.
But the rendering at runtime happens with the instance object that's been defined. So that all will happen in the controller.
I missed this KEP landing, and unfortunately I haven't read it yet. So, but based on what I see, one concern that I have that I would love to talk through at some point, I don't know if this is the right forum. This feels like there's one engine per framework version, and I could see a world in which you may want to combine those worlds. So I have KUDO, and like I'm leveraging a Helm chart. I'm leveraging Helm for a segment of what I want to have as a framework, in addition to a bunch of other things that I also want to manage, which I'm deciding will be KUDO only. Unless what you're telling me is if you want to do KUDO in that mixtured model, you have to move to Helm, in which case now I have to put the stuff in Helm and then come in. So I guess I saw like
paradigm, we would extend the Helm defined framework version. So the Helm component that you're talking about would be its own framework version with the Helm engine. And then as you extend it with KUDO, all of your extension templates would get rendered with the KUDO engine.
Okay, so maybe I need to look through it a little more. It looked to me like the framework version spec has the engine type defined. Mm-hmm. And as long as we can have a mixture, that would be my concern, is being able to mix.
KEP 12 covers that, but I mean, this raises a good question of like inheritance versus composition, right? Like right now, KEP 12, thinks of it as a and this maybe something we want to like evolve to or not, but like it thinks of extending down a single inheritance chain, right? And one thing you mentioned there, Ken, about like pulling in things from different sources, is interesting because like is it on a scale from valuable to confusing as hell, where does it land if I were to extend from 2 Helm charts and a CNAP bundle and another KUDO operator and want to use templates from all 4? Like is that and the reason I'm asking is actually like I use a straw man there, but it was one thing Zane mentioned and has really stuck with me, and I want to open a KEP that bounces off 12 and 13 was having this library of small snippets that you could bring in as customized patches to like apply a default network policy, right? Or apply like this is our little library of things that you can bring in. And one way to do that is to like say, I'm thinking about what KEP 14 looks like in this minder, KEP whatever it looks like. Do we reserve another keyword of like KUDO / network policy, right, and bring that in? Or does extends change to be able to bring in a default set of things and you opt into the templates you want? And I know it doesn't relate to these KEPs, but that's where composition becomes potentially a lot more interesting versus single line inheritance.
I'm wondering if on your spectrum you're asserting that confusing as hell cannot be valuable, but
maybe we just had multiple axes there. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess where I had
I'm looking at the fourth.
I guess part of what I had in my head was things that we might even leverage labels. Like you would label something as its rendering type, and that you might even have multiple types of renderers. And I don't know. I really, to be fair, I should read all of this thoroughly and make sure that that I understand where we're at from the beginning.
Right now in KEP12, like the multiple renderers comes by having the reserved keyword of base. Base / foo will render based on the type of thing you're extending from.
And then what would you put on the engine type in that case then?
I think you just leave it off. Just
right.
default to the KUDO
Right.
one.
Whatever the base's render engine was defined as, that's what would be used.
So how I understood Ken's question was also if you have a KUDO chart and the Helm chart and you want to extend it, you can't just put one engine type in this field.
You put one engine type in the base framework, and then in the extension framework, you're right now restricted to one engine type for your templates that you're adding on.
All right.
But the base type would still get the engine for whatever engine that was defined with.
So let's say you wanted to, in some dystopian future, we added JSONit as a possible rendering engine, right? You could say my templates will be JSONit, irrespective of you're extending from Helm, because whatever is coming from your Helm extension will always use Helm. But now you can say, okay, well, I'm going to, my templates are actually written in JSONit, cutting out YAML, right? So that's why these make sense too as 2 separate KEPs.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Any more questions? It seemed to spark quite some discussion, which is pretty cool. If not, we're going to move on. All right, the next thing on my agenda is a KEP that Justin submitted. I'm not sure is Justin present?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah,
Do you want to give some introduction to the KEP? I saw that it has no reviews so far, so maybe introducing it like briefly could spark some interest.
Yeah, if you want to open the rendered version, it has diagrams.
How do I do that?
The 3 dots on the right. Where it says, no, below. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Or no, click the dots next to that button you just clicked. And there's like a view raw.
View file.
Yeah, view file. Yeah, that. There we go. Okay,
I
so
learned
basically,
something. Thank you.
so basically, this describes a process for provisioning clusters for us to use in CI. That way, we can deploy KUDO on them and then do testing with KUDO and frameworks. And basically, the idea was that we might want to deploy clusters in a variety of places, like MKE or EKS, GKE, everywhere. That way, we can test and make sure that KUDO works everywhere and all the frameworks work nicely. Obviously, that takes a long time to provision those if we wanted to do that at the beginning of every build. So the idea was to have a controller that maintained pools of these different clusters that when we make a CI job, we can request a cluster and then it'll give us a kube config for that. And then once you delete the request for it, it deletes the cluster. And it's all built on Terraform, so it can basically consume any Terraform module, and then it would mount the output variables as a secret into your pod that runs the tests. So, you know, in theory, we could run this against a DCOS cluster or a Kubernetes cluster, all sorts of things.
Awesome. I'm definitely, yeah, we'll want to review this. I mean, because we're going to need. I put up a bunch of stories for getting an E2E environment up and then evolving that into a test grid. So I'll prioritize reviewing this today as well on top of our release stuff.
Sounds good.
And that is kind of a subset. We have another CAP test infra, right? So that is also linked to that one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that one describes, well, that document basically says that we should be doing this.
Exactly, nice.
It looks pretty neat. It doesn't sound like a KUDO specific, right? It could be used for anyone starting like a Kubernetes cluster for testing or whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I was also thinking you could use it like for testing provisioning a cluster too, because we would have the Terraform controller. So you could still you wouldn't necessarily have to use a pre-provisioned pool. You could still use it to provision it at runtime and not have to have like awkward bash scripts to handle that.
Hey, Justin, I have a question. I know here it's a non-goal to choose cloud providers for test environments, and I agree with that. Have you put any thought into do you think it would be part of this CAP? Because as we go to implement, we'll may discover prerequisites. Would you consider part of this CAP to say that for something to use this ephemeral end-to-end test environments, that Kubernetes environment needs X, Y, Z, or do you think that's also included in that non-goals of choosing cloud providers?
I think we should put that in CAP 4, describing the requirements for the clusters that we test, basically.
Okay.
Because that says that we should test against a number of different clusters. So I think it makes sense there to outline what those.
Got it. So this is purely architecture and mechanics of
how
this
to provision. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't actually sure if it belonged as a KUDO CAP because it is rather general, but I figured you all were a good audience for it. And I was thinking we could write the controllers as KUDO frameworks. So yeah.
So the follow-on to whether it's KUDO or generic is the expectation that the code to implement this CAP land in KUDO?
Not necessarily. I just thought I would put the design in front of you all. So yeah, we could be in its own repo, or it could be a framework and live in the framework's repo.
Oh, that would be cool if it is like a KUDO framework or operator. Already a little bit leading towards the next next topic.
Kubernetes with KUDO on top of KUDO.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds fine. Yeah.
It's KUDO all the way down.
Just got to make sure to use released versions for our testing.
Any more questions to the testing? Okay. All right, let's move to the high point of today's agenda. Framework versus operator. To be honest, I don't have any strong opinion here, so if anyone wants to kick out the discussion, I feel like it's kind of marketing, so whoever feels like.
I do want to preface, I realized something later down the road, that we don't have to change the CRD names to make this change. We can call out the deprecation of the CRD names, but after 030, from a framework installation developer perspective, that's all covered behind kubectl kudo install, and framework.yaml doesn't use it. So we don't. I thought this was also going to be a large rename and change all the packages again, but we can do this in steps. So that's kind of nice. It reduces the risk, and we can call out, hey, as of 030, the CRD framework and the CRD framework version are deprecated in favor of blah blah blah. In 1.0 or 050, these will be removed. So
you do agree that we would change the CRD so we could just roll it out slowly?
Yeah, and the other thing I was thinking, we may not even use CRDs for storage once we in this new format, right? We're using it for now, but that's not necessarily something we need to continue doing, especially if we yeah. So there's two separate concerns here. So yeah.
Okay, so that's like the implementation, but in terms of do we do framework or do we do operator? Does anyone have any so are we pretty much decided to go operator, or which feels like most people are? So are there any arguments towards sticking to framework?
I'll try to be the devil's advocate there. That's why I wrote a lengthy thing, and I'm pleased to see no one responded to it. So I killed that conversation right there.
Yeah, absolutely, Fabi. I was like, oh boy, he's serious about it. I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm gonna leave another comment, Fabi.
Yeah. The TLDR is essentially, I don't feel it is that much necessary, but the whole comment is basically more the thought process, how I got there, and maybe doing that another time would probably say maybe we can still do it or should do it. But I just thought it wasn't. One interesting note there was when you look at, for instance, the CoAS operator framework, it's kind of like they bring on the same level with naming it operator and framework in one name. They kind of make operator and framework in a way similar, so it's maybe not even needed to have that extra step in between from
they call it that because it's a framework to build an operator, though.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
I to add in to the conversation, I guess I think there's confusion either way, which obviously requires evangelism and documentation to probably resolve. I think you're going to have confusion either way without clarification, and that operator probably aligns with the community better and aligns with the ideas and concepts that are already forming in the minds of operators who use Kubernetes, to throw in a little bit of a pun. But KUDO almost does become an operator of operators. I see that as your 3C here. What is the operator itself? And in some ways, you could say that our language is a way of instrumenting or providing instructions to the one operator, potentially. But I think that becomes very confusing because I think people are going to be looking at, hey, I've got 3 different operators I'm going to replace by using KUDO. So they see 3 separate operators. Anyway, I don't think I have a strong opinion either. I do think there's confusion that will have to be resolved. I don't think there's a choice that eliminates our need to clean up and communicate, what is intended. I think that will be necessary.
Yeah, I'm going to make my case again because I do have a strong opinion on this. So, first point is these things are, the community commonly refers to these things as operators, and it's an overloaded term. So I looked for references. I'll paste it on the issue. So people call both the design pattern an operator. That was in the original core as blog posts. They say, you know, operators are design pattern for automating software. So it's design pattern. People also refer to the controllers, the actual piece of software, as an operator. People also call the combination of controller and CRDs an operator. So it's completely overloaded. But you know, I think it's widely used. You know, the thing that you put on a cluster to manage, you know, a complicated piece of software, that's what people call operators. So that's one reason for changing it. I think it's just, you know, whether you like the overloadedness of it or not, that's what people call it. And then just a general principle for me is, you know, if we introduce a new name here, then we should have a good reason to do that, right? I don't see a reason to distinguish the things you build with KUDO from what the community refers to as operators. They're the same thing to me, so why introduce a new term? And then the other argument to me is, I don't think framework is an appropriate term to describe the things you build with KUDO. Right? A framework is something you build on top of. So we could say KUDO is a framework for building operators. That would work, I think, just in terms of what the word means. But I think calling the things you build with KUDO frameworks, that I just don't think it matches what it is. So those are my arguments.
Yeah, I was pretty like I'm you know, not being too into the name frameworks either. I was wanting like a mysterious option 3 here, or like third option here to crop up that never did. And if we're most akin to meta controller, right? And in the style of how we're approaching building operators, that we're closest to them. In that we're a polymorphic controller that runs multiple things, right? Now, we significantly differ from them in a lot of ways, but as soon as I saw and really thought about, like, there was at one point when the Vitesse operator was built on meta controller, right? And so that brought me over to what you were saying more and more, Toby, and agreeing with that argument, because in meta controller's mind, you can build an operator using meta controller, and it's just managing it's doing my argument against before, right? It's using a set of CRDs to configure a controller for another set of CRDs. So, I mean, I'm fine with it now.
I think we also capture the polymorphicness by calling it a universal operator, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I hesitate, but you made a good point, Jared. And this is a combination of what Toby said. There is a collision of controller as an operator. And what I'm wondering is, maybe we call it a controller. Like it would mirror and match to what the Kubernetes world sees as controllers. It is a controller. You can describe, and we do have a polymorphic controller that takes controllers, which can be viewed as operators, right? So I hesitate.
I think we're doing the same thing again. Like, we're introducing a new term.
I would.
You go to operator hub.io, right? It says at the top, it's a home to share operators, find existing operators, list your operators.
I would. Yeah, I agree. I would architecturally call the manager component our controller, right? Like at its core, like a controller or an operator is a controller, or controllers plural, plus CRDs, and we are still doing the CRD part of that. So, but KUDO is an operator that is a controller and operates on instance CRDs, and in the future, a MySQL CRD, a whatever other CRD is out there, right?
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. And the piece of software that does things as a controller, that's what it's called. Let's call it that too. The point I feel really strongly about is that when we should rename KUDO Builder frameworks to KUDO Builder operators, right? Because that's sort of you're new to this, right, that's the first thing you're going to see. So the things in there should be called operators. That's the one I feel most strongly about.
I tried to talk Ravi. He can't into coming into this meeting here, but he can't come. But think so. That makes sense to me. Can we? So it's polymorphic in a way that if we want to describe what an operator is in one sentence, we probably won't be able, because the community uses it as a pattern, then as this combination from a controller and the CLD and so forth, and in all kinds of different mixes. Could we settle on how we look at a operator, what an operator is before we do the change?
But do we have a different definition? I don't think we do.
Well,
I think we just have two levels of it, right? Like, yeah, we don't have a different definition. We just KUDO is an operator of operators, and it's also a toolkit to build operators. Yeah, so I'm on Toby's side. Like that makes, like, I don't know if we need to redefine it at all.
Okay.
I would argue that it's actually harmful to the project to use an alternative term, because then we'll just spend our entire time explaining ourselves. And people will be like, if I'm not building an operator on KUDO, what am I building?
Yeah. Now we can be a little bit more specific about, like, that the thing you use to build KUDO operators is not KUDO, it's our SDK, right? KUDO's the thing that runs your operator. If that's ends up freaking people out for some reason, right? But we could just call it the KUDO SDK or something else.
What
right?
I would prefer is, I would say KUDO is a toolkit for building Kubernetes operators. Part of the toolkit is a universal controller that you can configure with YAML manifest, so you don't have to write your own. Like,
I like it. Yeah.
Elevator pitch.
Just really quick, is KUDO the SDK, or is KUDO the runtime?
Both.
It's both, so that's why I would call it a toolkit, right? And one thing that's in the toolkit is the runtime, the controller.
Is there another term that combines both toolkit and runtime? I'm just thinking about, how do I say this to customers? Like, how do I tell them what KUDO is, so that when we, eventually offer commercially, or, I know that it's an open source meeting, but I'm just sort of like wondering for the marketplace in general, to make it more abstract. How do we prevent people from getting confused, in other words?
Well, Toby, can I take a shot?
Yeah, go for it.
I would say like KUDO is an operator that manages other operators, right? Like it's in the name of it, and it ships with a toolkit to write those operators with, right? Because KUDO is going down in the direction of where you could turn a Helm chart into an operator, right? It's going down a direction where you could run the Prometheus operator with KUDO. It's going in another direction. You could possibly even run a CNAP bundle with it, right? It's like, as Toby was saying, it's a universal operator. So I don't know. I would lean towards saying like KUDO is an operator for an operator for operators, and this is all beta talk I'm throwing out there because I'm not entirely sure of it the more I say it. That has a built-in set of tools for building one as well. I don't know.
I think I would be careful with the operator for operators. You have to explain that.
Yeah.
But
it reminds me of the very similar paradigm to like Python, in the sense that you've got this binary that can run Python scripts, and the scripts are really like their own functions, but they're really just inputs to a larger executable, even though they might look like executables on their own. And I don't know if that helps or confuses. There's some connotation with Python and coding with it, but in this paradigm, your Python scripts are like your YAML files. They're inputs to your executable that is KUDO, or the Python binary, and gives you all the functionality that you've defined.
I wouldn't mind taking a shot at it. I would, looking at it from strictly a customer's perspective, the business value that KUDO provides is creating operators. And we do it by reducing the amount of code that would be otherwise necessary. We simplify it. So it's a toolkit that enables a customer to create and run operators. And that's it. We have all the tooling and runtimes as a part of the toolkit to enable that.
I didn't realize I was on mute. I like that.
But that definition centers on a toolkit. KUDO is a toolkit that, so it is in that case a toolkit.
It's a set of tools which includes runtimes and it helps operators and devs, right? People creating operators, people running operators. It helps all those people. It's a toolkit that includes all that is necessary to create and run operators on Kubernetes and reduces the burden on developers by a long shot.
Well, technically, we introduced a toolkit and need to talk about what a toolkit is. But yeah, so like what Jared said earlier, like it's two things. And for the renaming of the frameworks repo in the KUDO builder org, I have no pushbacks or anything. I think that makes totally sense to rename that.
So let's maybe start there because it seems like there's a bunch of sub issues we need to talk about. But I didn't hear any pushback on calling the things you build with KUDO operators instead of frameworks, or does anybody have an argument against that?
Nope.
Okay, then let's agree on that, and then we can separately discuss how do we refer to KUDO itself. Is it a toolkit? Is it an SDK? What is it? Let's separate that.
So logistics question here. I'll put to the group then. Do we put it in a deprecation notice for 030 and have this all renamed by 040 here in a couple of weeks, or 031 or whatever? Or do we hold up 030 by a few days so that we can, because we'll need to rename. I'm not thinking about the CRDs right now because we can deprecate and hold on that. But I'm thinking about changing framework.yaml to operator.yaml, changing all of the public API references that we still have to make that match, and updating our frameworks.
I think we should do at least the package changes in 030 since we're already changing that, and we should probably do the change so that we don't break it twice.
I agree with
that. Like my argument for doing at least part of that in 030.
Okay. Is there a downside, just speaking of breaking things, is there a downside to leaving the CRD names for a version? Because that's a much larger change and affects a lot more code.
I'm fine with leaving that.
It will it will affect either we need to write a migrator on 040 that'll automatically migrate existing ones, or tell people to just reinstall when 040 comes out.
We're alpha. I think we can tell people to reinstall.
Cool.
Okay, so I guess the summary is that we're going with the operator, so we can resolve this with that, right?
Yeah, we'll need.
We're going to plot at least.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, you go.
We'll just need an issue to rename the public or the files framework.yaml to operator.yaml.
Okay.
I think there's more impact in that, but we still need the issue. I want to just assert a thought, and it's not strong. I would prefer that we have a regular rhythm of releases that we just adhere to, and that we are resistant to stopping that release. We're totally alpha. We totally expect to break things. We totally should have a regular repetition of getting things out. So with that said, I'm not against holding it. I totally agree and am empathetic towards what Alena said, that we should just break things, that it's easier if we just break it once. I agree with that completely. I would love to move to a model where we're just like regularly every week or every 2 weeks or whatever that rhythm is, we just release.
Yep, totally. I do agree. We should list out any features right now preventing that. I think one of those is checking KUDO version on an operator install. Because we can't pin what's in Zookeeper right now to KUDO 020, and so we should take the list of things where we have to go update all of our operators. That's gonna be hard for a minute to get used to, but we need to go like look at what causes those incompatibilities, forcing other people to upgrade. And as we go, address those, right?
That's good.
So with all that said, we do have the one issue of that I opened this morning. I guess it's a collection of like three closely interrelated issues. We have to solve those anyway. In order to ship 030, because you can't install frameworks from file system with those. And so I think we can get these done today and tomorrow. These aren't very big changes, any of them. Do we just change, like, do we want to create an issue listing off everything we'll need to change if we want to put, Ken, if you wouldn't mind doing this, listing off everything for 030 that will need to change from framework to operator that affects publicly, and then we can go no-go if we want it in, like what we want to do for 030, and are the things we don't want to do enough to hold 030 for to include, or can they wait? You know what I'm trying to say. Like my word vomit soup there just didn't work out, but you know where I'm going.
Sounds great. I'll have it. Yeah, at this point, based on what we're saying, I think we should probably plan to try to get the release out tomorrow, and with all the things that you described in place, with the ambition of getting these change identified, what will be necessary to switch to operator, and if we can get that, especially at the CRD level, we should just resolve that.
Okay.
Okay, can we move on to the community point then? Yes, we can. Is Matt present, or someone? Like, is anyone aware of any talks or
Matt's
meetups
online.
or anything around?
I'm actually doing a meetup tonight in St. Louis on KUDO.
Oh, nice.
So it's a little, I'm not as prepared as I would hope, but I have a good idea of what I want to talk about.
Do we have a calendar for that already? Or I saw that it was on the agenda from last week, but I don't.
Matt threw together a spreadsheet which includes dates.
Cool.
It's in those minutes somewhere, probably 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Okay. Anyone else aware of any meetups, talks, whatever?
I'm going to at some point before the deadline submit. I'm trying to put together some talks I would want to give for KubeCon San Diego. So I will put out my CFPs for review as soon as that happens. Actually, does it make sense to have a repository for all of that, like slides and CFPs and all of our community stuff as a separate thing that, you know, Matt or someone else would curate?
Sounds good. Let's do it.
I think Jorg suggested that a month or two ago.
Yeah, hi guys, it's Matt here. Yeah, we're tracking all this stuff in multiple places at the minute, so yeah.
So that's one more, right?
Yeah, let's add another one. with version control.
Okay, I think we arrived at the end. I will have to leave like 1 minute ago, so can someone please wrap up and plan the next community meeting while I'm gone, like right now?
Yeah, we can do that.
Thank you.
No worries.
Have a nice evening, guys. Bye.
Thank you for hosting, Alena. Bye. One thing to note there now for the next one, it's 4th of July. So what do we do about this?
I guess it's the EU edition, isn't it?
Yeah, so we can stay within the same time zone. We just need to find a host from the EU, preferable.
No, I was joking. We can totally. I'm okay with moving to the 3rd or the 5th.
I think most will take the 5th off, and if they're going to be effective, it probably has to be the 3rd.
3rd, yeah. Okay. Any objections to the 3rd?
No, 1 day earlier. That's the Wednesday. I'll just make those changes in the calendar, and so they reflect it. But are we doing Pacific time at 10 or Pacific time at 8? Today was Pacific time at 8. Is there any preference?
I'm okay going back to 10 Pacific.
Sounds good to me too. All right, let's just do that then. And if not, we can still discuss it in the channel. But who wants to be a host?
I can make no host guarantees now for the next foreseeable future. I may be out next week. I might not be. So I would say I'm out on hosting duty until probably late July, early August.
Gaston's not here. We should make him.
Seems reasonable.
You're muted, Fabian.
Okay, so I will be the host for now, and then we see, like in case no one else wants to. Of course.
Yep. There's one more thing. I think we ran out of time. I'm going to float it around by the mailing list. In that case, was to have a weekly rotating community person who would help with the triaging of inbound bugs and issues, and generally for that period, working on improving community docs and that process. So shouldn't be a huge factor in taking away much from people's time, but at least to make sure that we can develop those standards as we are developing our code base as well.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Might I also, unless it adds complexity, might I suggest that the person who hosts the next meeting is the person that's the community person leading into it. If they are gathering up all that information and then kind of honing it and are managing it, then they would be the best probably to create the agenda for that next meeting and then host it.
I think that's a great idea. Yeah.
Very good idea. Yeah.
Well, cool.
That's me then. I don't know if that's a good idea, guys. All right, sure. Let's do it.
You're going to set the standard, Fabian. We're going to follow your lead.
Yeah, we just said it would it just came up as like, hey, this would be a good idea without even like defining what that would be. So, I mean, other than being the point of contact for the week, like if someone were to open an issue, like whatever that is you to define this week, and we'll retro it, right? Like we can add things, we can remove things.
Yep. No worries. Cool. Yeah, sounds very good.
All right.
Perfect. Well, in that case, then I think we're done for today. We took a little bit longer, but we had also plenty of things to discuss. So I'll see you all fresh Wednesday, the 3rd of July at 10 a.m. PDT. and I will update the calendar, of course. And leading towards it, we do some triaging, closing some issues, hopefully, and releasing 0.030. So that's all right, everyone. Well, have a great day, and talk to you soon.
Yep.
Bye, everybody.
Ciao.
Thanks, guys.